Yes. Okay,
Yes, the unit.
hearing.
Give me just a second. Go ahead and say something.
Say something.
See if we can hear.
They can hear online. Thank you. Molly Boyd can hear online. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone to the June 2023 Legacies and Lunch, a hybrid program of the Butler Center for Arkansas Studies. I'm Heather Register-Benden, the Programs and Website Coordinator for the Bobby L. Roberts Library of Arkansas History and Art at the Central Arkansas Library System. Today and for the next 18 months, hopefully only 18 months, we will be presenting from the UA Little Rock downtown space here at 333 President Clinton Avenue. I want to thank Marta and Emily of UA Little Rock downtown for giving us a home for this program while the main library is being renovated. If you want to sign up for our email list and get information about all Roberts Library programs and events, you can either see Macklin in the back of this room, or you can go to robertslibrary.org and sign up directly. Please consider donating to the Cowles Foundation to support the programs of the Butler Center for Arkansas Studies and the Encyclopedia of Arkansas. You can go to robertslibrary.org or encyclopediaofarkansas.net to give a one-time or monthly recurring donation. Your support is greatly appreciated. Today's talk is being live streamed to YouTube. We got it to work, yay! And will be available to view on the Cowles YouTube channel immediately following the program. And today's speaker will answer questions at the end of the session. So for folks on Zoom, you can just type your questions in the chat box and I'll be monitoring them. So today we are joined by Blake Wintory to talk about the Unionist Demby family. Did I pronounce that right? Okay. Blake Wintory is the Director of Museum Services for the Division of Arkansas Heritage. Prior to his current position, he served as Director of Preservation at the Heritage Foundation of Williamson County, Tennessee, and spent a decade as the Director of Lakeport Plantation House, an Arkansas State University heritage site in Chicot County. And even before that, and I'm adding this to his bio, Blake and I worked together for 7 years. 3 years. Okay, 3 years. At Mosaic Timber's Cultural Center here in Little Rock. So everybody give Blake a warm in-person and virtual welcome.
Thank you, Heather. This is my second time to do a Legacies and Lunch. And when I was at the Lakeport Plantation, I named my lecture series there Lakeport Legacies. I stole the name from you. I told you that. So I've been back in Little Rock since September, and this comes out of my first got back here taking a tour of the old State House collections, and I got a glimpse of the Dembys center point battle flag for the militia war in 1868, and it really intrigued me. And I was looking for a project I could work on, or historical work I could work on that kind of connected the old State House and Historic Arkansas Museum and other collections in Little Rock. And so this is kind of grown out of that. I didn't really know what I was getting into when I started it, but it became very interesting and led in a lot of interesting directions. I really want to tell you about several different things. Thing turning itself off.
It may have, may fallen asleep.
Maybe I can go for you.
Well, it buzzed, but it didn't. It's not turning on.
Never been good with those.
Is it still plugged in? Is the
Let's try to do that.
Oh.
Can I do that for you myself?
yeah, is the dongle still plugged in?
Yes.
Oh, wait, it's working now.
Ah, wonderful. There you go.
Okay, good.
So I'm really gonna try to talk about four things. I'm gonna talk about the flag, the battle flag. I'm gonna talk about unionism in general. Talk about the Historic Arkansas Museum and their Arkansas May project, the Old State House collection and how the Dembys relate to it. And also reconstruct the lives of, to some degree, of father and son, James W. Demby and Josiah H. Demby, who are pictured of it. So father and son Unionists, James W. Demby and Josiah H. Demby were Southern-born men who enlisted in the Union Army. They were jewelers and watchmakers by trade. James W. Demby also published the first Union newspaper in Little Rock following Union occupation in September 1863. His son Josiah played important roles in the 1868 Militia War. He was also active in the Grand Army of the Republic, a Union veterans group, and remained a staunch Republican throughout his life. So just a couple of things to say about the two of them. In uncovering their story, James W. Demby, the father, comes off as a bit of a self-serving opportunist, but he was also a radical free thinker. So it's kind of maybe if you hear this, maybe you can weigh whether he's a shady character or a man of principles. Probably weighs on the former rather. While his son Josiah Demby, he largely appears as a dependable, loyal citizen and Republican and a proud veteran. Now, something I'll say about these images. The image on of James Demby, the father, that comes from an ancestry account of a descendant, and then the CDV of Josiah Demby. There's a copy at the Butler Center. And there's also a copy of that same CDV at the Old State House collection. The later portrait of Josiah Demby is also in the Old State House collection. So a little bit about collections. The Old State House has 17 items in a Demby collection. So I was kind of surprised at how much Demby stuff was out there. So while the Dembys are not well known, they are known. They're cited in several books and Encyclopedia of Arkansas articles and a lot of places. There's not really like one place where you can go read about them. But the Old State House has a collection. The Arkansas State Archives has a Josiah Demby collection that was originally called the Louise Demby Shull collection. The Butler Center has a collection related to Josiah Demby. The Historic Arkansas Museum doesn't own anything related to the Dembys, but they are documented in the Arkansas May project as watchmakers and silversmiths. There's also private collections, as evidenced by One Descendants Ancestry.com collection has a lot of important stuff. And they've also been on exhibit at least two different places. I found a reference in a Hot Springs paper where there was Demby memorabilia displayed in 1965. And then the Old State House did a recent donations exhibit in 2009 that highlighted some of their work. But one of the important things about James W. Demby, the father,
Not wanting to. There.
oh, there we go. Okay. One more important thing about the father, James W. Demby, is that he was a published author, so he left a lot of writings for us to look through. He published 2 books about the Civil War during the Civil War, and he published at least 3 newspapers. So he published Mysteries and Miseries of Arkansas, Defense of Loyalty, that he published in St. Louis in May 1863. The War in Arkansas he published later that same year. When he got to Little Rock, he started publishing the National Union. None of those papers are still extant, but they're referenced in a lot of newspapers time period. And from 64 to April 65, he published Home Aegis, a monthly review. He later published the Arkansas Journal, which a couple of issues, or one issue that survives. And then he also published a history. He wasn't the author, but the publisher, a history of the 3rd Missouri Cavalry that came to Little Rock in September 1863. So some of these are harder to find. The books and the home aegis are on microfilm. You can find those at the state archives. I think the originals are at the Huntington Library. I think he sent copies to the Huntington Library in California. Continue to be a problem for it to move on. And you may have to sit over there and
Try it again.
that worked. If I did it, it worked. If you're familiar with the Arkansas Made project, which was earlier version came out in the 90s, and then in I think it was 2020, 2 volumes of Arkansas Made were published, and one of those books has a section devoted to silversmiths, jewelers, and watchmakers, and there's an index in the back that includes some documentation about Josiah and J.W. Demby as documentation of silversmiths and watchmakers. But in general, if you read their section on silversmiths, in Arkansas, not a whole lot of silver is being made in Arkansas. So Arkansas silversmiths, jewelers, watchmakers primarily worked in retail trade and making practical pieces like watches and clocks. Arkansas Made notes that craftsmen were masters of diversification, turning to watch and clock repair, jewelry making and repair, eventually to retail supplement silver sales. So that certainly applies to the Dembys. I don't think they mostly did not make their livings at silversmiths. They did were in the retail trade. So another glimpse at the Dembys as a merchant. The image there on it's labeled 1879 letterhead or stamp, Hot Springs, Arkansas. So eventually James W. Demby is in Hot Springs, and he apparently has a retail business. And I found that stamp on the top of a letterhead when he was writing to California, sending his manuscripts there, his books. He was writing a letter, and that's top of the letterhead. So it shows that he was a maker and jeweler in Hot Springs at one point. And then in the little quote there, it says, this is kind of an odd business proposition. Someone is saying, hey, we could, our merchants in Pine Bluff and Jefferson County can send our goods north of the Mississippi River, and we can trade with, I think what they're saying, Native Americans. But they quote saying that the grocer merchants will forward their first trip of whiskey and tobacco and wheat bread, and then messengers Parse, Norton, and Demby will send their various trinkets for the natives. And so all 3 of those individuals, Parse, Norton, and Demby, are all jewelers or watchmakers in Pine Bluff. So there are no, that I'm aware of, any kind of made items that are connected to Dembys that are in Arkansas collection. But we also have this glimpse too. In 1855, December, we had this advertisement from James I. Mulkey, another jeweler, and he has purchased the entire stock of James W. Demby's retail shop for his shop in Helena. And this is the first, I think this is the first mention I can find of James W. Demby in Arkansas in December 1855. I know it's the first newspaper reference. I think it's the first reference in actually in Arkansas. And you'll have to remember Mulkey's name because he comes up later on. And then this is a snapshot of the old State House's web interface for searching their collection. But you can see a lot of items in their collection related to Dembys. And most of it is related to Josiah Demby and his strong identity as a Republican and Union veteran. So he and his father both have displayed Union sentiment in the lead up to the Civil War. And so many of the artifacts include ceremonial dress, ribbons, his GAR coat, sash, things that he would have received or worn at a Grand Army of the Republic encampments or Unions. But just to look at a few of those items. This is his commander, his calling card as the commander of the Brown Post number 13 at Hot Springs, circa 1889. And in the collection is also his reunion overcoat. And then there's 2 ribbons. They have several ribbons. But these would have been, he would have gotten these when he went to these Grand Army of the Republic encampments or reunions. So based on the collection, I can tell that he attended the reunions or the encampments in 1886 at San Francisco, 1889 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and 1890 in Boston, and I compared to Chicago. And then we know, I'll get to that. Here's an image. He's possibly in this image of the encampment in Boston, 1890. That's from the Library of Congress. But I also know that he attended the encampment in St. Louis in 1887. So that year, there's a pretty big spread in the local newspaper that 20,000 veterans marched through the rain and mud during the ceremonies. And they would have marched through some of these arches that they constructed to honor Grant and Lincoln and other soldiers and soldiers. And they also would have gotten ribbons like the one you see. And then lucky for us, they interviewed a lot of veterans. They interviewed about a dozen men from Arkansas, including James H. Demby of Hot Springs. So I've got a snapshot of here, but it says, Demby's being interviewed. He says, I joined the 1st Arkansas Mounted Rangers at Helena in 1862. They were subsequently merged with the 2nd Arkansas Cavalry. We served before Vicksburg and then joining General Steele's command. I fit in a glorious career in the defense of Helena and Little Rock with the 7th Army Corps. I brought up with me the encampment flag, which I drew from the government in 1862. And yesterday I carried it through the rain. So here he's telling his background, but he's also mentioning a flag. I think this is probably not the flag that's in the collection. This is probably a different flag that's in the Old State House collection. Because if he got this flag in 1862, it wouldn't meet the description of the one of the Old State House. So this is the flag of the Old State House. It is not in very good condition. It has been conserved. It's like a vacuum. Vacuum sealed is not the right word, but it's conserved. But I don't think it's ever been on display. But this flag is from the Battle of Center Point on November 4th, 1868. Major Josiah Demby of the Arkansas State Militia led Patterson's militia in the battle against the Klan at Center Point in Sevier County, which is now Howard County in southwest Arkansas. And so this all precipitated from Arkansas rejoining the Union that summer, Howard Clayton getting elected, an outburst of land throughout the countryside that was intimidating Republicans, especially Black families and Black voters. And so Howard Clayton declared martial law, and he created 4 military districts and called up a militia. Militia didn't exist, so he basically relied on former Union troops, both black and white, to fill the ranks of the militia. So Demby was sent under Patterson to southwest Arkansas, and some of the stuff was kind of a bit haphazard. There was no militia before the declaration of martial law, so there wasn't uniforms, they didn't have provisions. So a lot of these men were sent out not in military dress. They probably brought the weapons that they had, and they were not getting any kind of provisions, so they were told to live off the land. A lot of people in southwest Arkansas and southern Arkansas weren't aware that martial law was declared. They didn't know anything about militias, so they weren't too excited about these groups showing up and taking provisions from their houses or their stores. So there was a lot of tension between these, these areas that were kind of reconstructed and these militias coming through. But according to official accounts, only 2 militiamen were killed in the Battle of Center Point. 7 were wounded. They captured 60 Klansmen and raided a Klan's den. And they also, 2 of the men that were arrested were later hanged for murder. So according to Demby and Casterton, Howard Clayton, this was a successful eradication of the Klan in that area. And also Cullen Baker's gang had been in that area too. They probably weren't there when they arrived. But here is a sketch by the conservator of the flag. I know y'all can't see everything, there's some things covered, but it says our motto at the top, a strict observance of the law, U.S. Grant, Battle of Center Point, November the 12th, 1868, place on the 14th, what counts say. But it has 30 stars, which is really strange. And I thought there would be some sort of logic to why there'd be 30 stars in this flag. But I don't think it's symbolic of anything. The best guess that I have is that the reason why it has 30 stars, this is an old flag that's being repurposed as a political banner for U.S. Grant. And then it gets repurposed as this battle flag. That's my best guess, because a 30-star flag would have been from around 1850. So here's an example I found online. It looks pretty similar to this flag. And the 50th or the 30th state would have been Wisconsin. I think 1848 or 1849. I wrote it down, but I wrote it down. Anyway, look around 1850. So it's, I don't think there's any kind of symbolic reason of 30 stars on it. It's all over a flag that's been repurposed. Oh yeah, Wisconsin, here every time. Wisconsin becomes the 30th state on May 1848. Then California becomes the 31st state on September 18th. I think it's a circa 1850 flag. But this flag, I mean, obviously it's kept by Demby for a number of years, passed on through descendants, given to the old state house about a little over a decade ago. Obviously it's important to the family, important to Demby. This is something from a descendant's ancestry page. And Demby is corresponding with General Powell Clayton. Powell Clayton is writing his memoir, and Powell Clayton wants an account of the Battle of Center Point, and Demby is going to provide that for him. But at the bottom, he says that he still has the flag that he carried in the battle, and he could send it if he would like to see it. And I'm pretty sure he probably didn't send it to Powell Clayton, it stayed in the Demby family, but that's one of a few references to the flag that are historical documents. All right, to shift gears a little bit. Why were the Demby men Union men? Why were these Southern born men? Why did they stay with the Union? And if you read historians like Tom Black and Mark Christ, we shouldn't be surprised that there was unionism in Arkansas. Tom Black has noted in 2010 that historians and casual observers today underestimate unionism in Arkansas. Ken Barnes, writing in 1998, in his history of the Williamson clan, who were unionists from Conway County, he noted that little is known about these Arkansas foot soldiers in the Union, even though that 8,000 plus white Arkansans volunteered for service in the Union. 8,000 white Arkansans volunteered to be in the Union, and even there's another number for former slaves and black men from Arkansas that joined in Arkansas. So there's a lot of unionists in the Army. So this is not something I knew a lot about. So I found Martin Christ's entry and Tom in the encyclopedia, Tom DeBlack's writing on this. And Tom DeBlack notes that the reasons for unionism in the South, why it persisted, is that there was a strong tradition of unionism in the South. The South had been part of the Union. They had helped create this nation. They've been part of the federal government since the beginning. And then he also notes that Arkansas was new to the Union and somewhat undeveloped, so it was dependent on federal resources for its economy. Arkansas received protection and economic benefits from federal troops along Indian territory. The Swampland Reclamation Acts of the 1850s contributed to the economic boom that was going on. And then in Arkansas, there was only a few slaveholders. Only 20% of the white population owned any slaves. And then at the time, the Civil War starting, secession starting, Arkansas was preoccupied with internal politics rather than the politics of secession and states' rights. So we shouldn't be too surprised that we uncovered these two Union men. And then Mark, in his encyclopedia article on unionism, cited historian Christopher Phillips, and he categorized unions into two different categories of unconditional unionists and conditional unionists. Now, I don't know Demby's politics really well. We can look at his words later on, but I don't know his antebellum politics. It doesn't really spell out who he would side with. But unconditional unionists were generally anti-slavery Republicans or old line Whigs. And the conditional unionists were moderates, advocated staying in the Union so long as the federal government did not intervene with states' rights to determine local affairs, was the most common. If I were to guess, I would put Demby, James W. Demby, in the unconditional unionists. I don't know that he was an old line Whig. I don't think he was anti-slavery, but it seemed like he was an unconditional unionist based on the things he said. He didn't really spell out his politics, though. So we can look at his words and find a few things that kind of give us some hints on how he felt about unionism in his two books on Civil War. So In a section on loyalty, he evokes his father in the Revolutionary War and family tradition to justify his unionism. So he says, kind reader, did you ever think in this boasted country of freedom of thought, speech of the press, you would witness men, women, and children driven out of their homes to the cruelty of savages, or entertaining opinion inherited from their fathers and taught in every social circle? Controlled by a sense of duty to my imperiled country, I abandoned a comfortable home and domestic felicity to become a refugee under the banner I was taught by my revolutionary sire. So he's evoking his father and the Revolutionary War to justify his unionism. And then another section in a declaration of principles, he says, we declare for neither north nor south, nor part nor parcel, but our whole country, one and the same, and indivisible now and forever. We are Union men, and being convinced that our peace, prosperity, and happiness depend on the preservation of the federal union. We are in favor of maintaining it at all hazards and to the last extremity, with or without slavery. So that passage and a couple other places makes me think that he wasn't all that anti-slavery. I don't think he ever owned. I know in 1860 he owned one slave, an 80-year-old man. I don't think in any of the time this past that he owned like a large number of slaves. But it doesn't seem to be against slavery. So I think he's a little bit hard to categorize. But I would say he's maybe unconditional. And then another clue is kind of an odd one. I had to go back to a couple of times. In the late 1850s, he is publishing these book notices in the Boston Investigator. Seems to be publishing books and then selling them through this newspaper. So in one, he is J.W. Demby of Arkansas. This is books that are sent, I guess, into a reseller or a seller in Boston or New York. And it said he's publishing a book called Systems of Nature. Sometimes it just has his name, J.W. Demby, Arkansas. Another one, he's J.W. Demby of Kentucky. He's selling Voltaire's philosophical dictionary. And then the last one, he's J.W. Demby of Kentucky, History of All Christian Sects. I don't know if he's writing anything original, but he's certainly republishing other books as well. So when I went back and looked at this, I went back to the Boston Investigator and saw that the masthead probably could tell me a little bit. And so the newspaper is devoted to the development and promotion of universal mental liberty, which is truth, perseverance, union, justice, the means, happiness, the end. Hear all sides and then decide. So it seems like he's like a rationalist, a free thinker, person who wants to weigh all the evidence and come to conclusions. And then I did a little more digging, and I found this. It's the Boston Investigator, basically like advertising in another newspaper, 1862. And they said the cause of universal mental liberty, which seeks to establish the claims and teachings of nature and reason, and to overthrow those of superstition, bigotry, and priestcraft, still needs to support a free and independent press. So I also want to shift gears a little bit and talk about reconstructing the Demby family history a little bit. These sections right here comes from a 1918 family history written by son, Josiah Demby. And without some of the things he said here, I think we probably wouldn't be able to reconstruct his life or their lives. So he said, my father, James W. Demby, was born in North Carolina. His parents immigrated to Georgia when he was 3 years old. My father grew into manhood on his father's farm on the Yellow River in Gwinnett County. He married Matilda Cameron. About 1 year after my father's marriage, his father-in-law, Archibald Cameron, died leaving 8 children. My mother taking one of her younger sisters to raise, Sally. Sally grew to womanhood in my father's house and married Henry Collins, a merchant, another watchmaker eventually, silversmith. My father and mother had 3 children, Emma, Josiah H., and Lizzie. My father and mother disagreed and parted. My father, the 3 children immigrating to maybe Smithland, Texas. Like to go to Texas. My mother went to Eufaula, Alabama, her people. My father married Mattie Bell, actually another Matilda, these things, and my mother married James Johnson. Henry Collins immigrated to Cleveland, Tennessee. His wife, Sally, never had any children, and Collins wanted to divorce her. Collins paid his wife a sum of $2,000 to get him a divorce. Sally Collins immigrated to Pine Bluff and bought a farm, 160 acres. My father immigrated to Pine Bluff, and my aunt, being alone, was having great attachment to the Demby children, having been with them. So I'm not sure who arrives first. Does Sally come to Pine Bluff? Does James Demby came to Pine Bluff first? I'm not quite sure the timing, but they're arriving about the same time. And it may have been and he may have been following Sally around because she got that large sum of money from her ex-husband. And then another source is also from the descendant on Ancestry. There's this obituary. I found other obituaries of Josiah Demby in a lot of the digital newspaper databases. I haven't found this one. This one's the best one. But just, I won't read it all to you, but some of the high points are praising him for his patriotism, that he's one of these Southern-born and bred men who stood by the Union during the Civil War. It says he was educated at St. John's College in St. Louis. This is the son I'm talking about. I can't find a St. John's College anywhere in St. Louis. And I asked the St. Louis Public Library, they couldn't find one. The only thing I could find was a St. John's, like boys, like maybe a boarding school or an orphanage. Yeah, I think someone probably wrote down the wrong name of the college, probably. But it tells us he went into business with his father at Schuler and Club. And two things that are important because it shows how he benefited from political patronage after Reconstruction. He was appointed manager of the government bathhouse in Hot Springs, 1982, and he also was appointed a U.S. Marshal for several years. And then something that's not mentioned there related to political patronage. James W. Demby was eventually appointed a pension agent for the U.S. government. He was also accused of bribery too. Kind of recurring thing, problem with him. So in the 1840 census, I can find a 23-year-old James Demby working in agriculture in Gwinnett County, Georgia. He's living, I won't go through all the family, but probably Sally's living with him. Josiah isn't quite born yet, but he's on the horizon. But he owns no slaves. So he's engaged in agriculture, basically. And no slaves in the household or working on the farm. You want to forward it for me?
Try to, yeah. Go ahead and try it again.
Okay. Is it just going to slave over this?
Yeah, a little bit.
All right. So, but James W. Demby quickly gets in trouble. There's a series of courthouse sales or sheriff sales in 1843 and 1846 after Demby loses some sort of court case. He gets sued by somebody. I don't know exactly how he gets in trouble, but in 1843, the property where his house is being sold. So he's losing his house in 1843. And then 1846, his entire personal contents are listed in that other article. And he's losing everything basically, which is sad for him and his family. But interesting from an Arkansas Made perspective, because at the top of the list is two clocks, one set of silversmith's tools, one box of watches, and sundry watch items. So he may be engaged in agriculture, but he's also a trained silversmith as well. All right, so find him again in 1850. He's in Atlanta. I think he was in Atlanta by 1847, but find him in 1850 census in Atlanta. And he's in more trouble. You can see on your left, my left, your right, James W. Demby and J.I. Mulkey, so that man he sold his entire contents to in Helena, they are arrested for stealing goods from the railroad depot in Atlanta, and they are in jail. So kind of there are numerous articles on this incident in Georgia papers, but basically it looks like Mulkey or probably mostly Demby is probably the mastermind on this. He has hired African-American men. I don't know if they're enslaved or if they're free. He's hired them to go rob the railroad depot, and they got caught. And when they got caught, they said, we're not the masterminds behind this, and they point towards Demby and Mulkey. And when the police show up, they find that their store is full of stolen goods from the railroad depot. And you see that Collins is also implicated in this. Collins is, of course, Mary's Sally, the niece. And so that article is from April 1850. And then if you look at the census in November 1850, you can see that Demby is listed. There's no information about his occupation or where he's born or anything, because he's probably in jail in November 1850. And this is probably gives you some insight into why he and his wife parted ways, that he was a thief, he was in jail. All right, so his troubles are not over. He is still in jail in the spring and summer of 1851. In May 1851, there are articles saying that he has escaped from the jail. He is decamped for parts unknown, but was caught a few days since in New Orleans. I don't know how you hire a bounty hunter to find someone from Atlanta and Georgia, but J.J. Diamond of Stone Mountain found him in New Orleans and brought him back. He was now safely lodged in the county jail, at least for the moment. But the next month, we've got an article titled "A Prisoner Escaped." So Mr. J.W. Demby, who was some weeks ago clearly caught in New Orleans and brought back to this county and lodged in jail, has escaped again. So the details are the jailer, his son, and another gentleman were in the room for some purpose on Tuesday evening when Demby, being a little nearer to the entrance than either of the others and thinking he might as well be looking out for better quarters elsewhere, stepped beyond the door, closed it, and very deliberately locked it and decamped, leaving the astonished trio to find their way out as best they could between bolts and bars. Demby was not seen or heard of afterwards. So I think he made his escape and never went back to Georgia after that. And we know from family history that they're saying he was in Texas, and his wife went to Alabama. I can find him in Kentucky as early as 1853. He's checking into a hotel. His book notices are being published from Kentucky in April, November of 1855. And then later that year, in December 1855, he's selling his entire stock of jewelry to Mulkey in Helena. In the meantime, Mulkey and Collins had gone to Tennessee, and so I don't know how he kept in touch with them in Tennessee, but they were in Chattanooga, and then at least Collins was in Cleveland. And then we know in December of 56, he is buying a home and a residence in Pine Bluff for $1,000. He married his second wife in St. Louis in June of 1857. So that's probably when Josiah, his son, is in college in St. Louis. And I know from deeds, Demby is buying Bulgarian instruments, watchmaking tools from W.H. Norton. And the same deed notes that Norton was indebted to Demby and could foreclose if not paid. And then he purchases 320 acres from Sally Collins in Pine Bluff. And then later, I think that deed says that Sally's in Pulaski County. I can't find her in Little Rock or Pulaski County. I just kind of lose track of her. But he purchases that 320 acres from Sally. And I think he's operating a nursery. And so I found there's someone writing in one of the Pine Bluff papers in the 19-teens talking about the beginnings of the Civil War, and they mentioned that Demby had a nursery. That's the best citation I have that he owns a nursery. There's some more evidence I'll get you in a second that will justify my theory, I think. So in 1860 census, he's listed as a watchmaker. Presumably he's living on that 320 acres outside of Pine Bluff. He has $5,000 in real estate, $500 in personal property, and like I mentioned earlier, he owned one enslaved person, an 80-year-old man. And there's 2 laborers living with him that are listed as unknown. Maybe they're working on that nursery. His son apparently left college in St. Louis and is now, he says, working for his father as a jeweler. But he's living with William Norton. So William Norton is the one who sold his business to Demby, or at least acknowledge that he's indebted to Demby and he could foreclose at any point. So there's not a lot of people living with Norton. But Demby is one of them. He's listed as a watchmaker. So I presume he is working in that store, keeping an eye on his father's investment. But we're right on the eve of the Civil War, and if you're a Unionist in Pine Bluff, probably not the most comfortable place to be. If you're a Unionist in North Arkansas, maybe it's a better place, but they are in Pine Bluff. I don't have any of their thoughts or newspaper articles that mention them at this point, but I can give you a little bit of context. So South Carolina secedes from the Union in December 1860, and we begin a rapid shift toward the Civil War. So there's a Missouri traveler who arrived in Pine Bluff in January 1861, and he says there are plenty of Union men to be found in Pine Bluff, but as a general thing, people attend to their own business. No doubt that, so getting the quote there. So no doubt the loudest and most prominent voices were secessionists. Politicians like Senator Robert Ford Johnson and James Yell led the way in Pine Bluff. And there were even new secessionist voices in Pine Bluff. There was a new newspaper called the True South Run that began publishing in January 1861, in which the editor claimed, "I am secessionist now." So probably the very opposite of what James W. Demby was saying. Very opposite of secessionist. But he probably could identify with what the Missouri Traveler was saying, that there are Unionists who are keeping to themselves. The next month, Arkansas Episcopal Bishop Henry Lake said he believed that the feelings toward disunion are so strong that the community was apt to hang every man who says a word against immediate secession. So, nevertheless, on March 4th, the convention vote for secession failed. But following the attack on Fort Sumter on April 12th and Lincoln's request for soldiers on April 15th, there was little doubt that Arkansas would secede. And Pine Bluff is kind of leading that way. So there were a lot of articles that Arkansas is aroused, and people in Pine Bluff seizing boats on the river, on the Arkansas River. So the Dembys were living through that. And so the first kind of clue we get to what's going on with the Dembys is that Josiah Demby enlists in he enlists in the local home guard of the Pine Bluff Artillery on April 27, 1861, as a sergeant. So was he compelled to enlist? Did he do it his own free will? Based on everything else we know about him, I think he probably was compelled to enlist. He was 21 years old. He, as a member of this home guard, he was, the idea is that you were going to stay within the area around Jefferson County or Pine Bluff and not be sent anywhere else for 3 months. But the Pine Bluff Artillery was sent to Camp Rector, 5 miles above Memphis, along with other home guards, and they were quickly nationalized to be part of the Confederate Army. And so they had to re-enlist for 3 years, but about half of the men in the Pine Bluff Artillery chose not to enlist. They came back home, and Josiah Demby was one of them. It may not have been a popular thing to do, but he and a number of other men chose not to join the Confederate Army. But we also have this other story. In the summer of 1861, James W. Demby accompanied the body of an Ohio man back to Ohio. And so this man was Richard Ryan. He was a gardener working at a nursery. So my theory is that he was probably working for Demby. He was about 62 years old. He was an older man, but he was impressed with the local home guard, and he died in that service. And so this article from a West Virginia paper that was covering nearby Ohio news said that he was a native of Ireland. He came to Arkansas a considerable time ago, I think maybe months. I don't think considerable time. I can't find him in any. He's not in 1860 census. He didn't purchase any land, so I think he had been there maybe at most a year. He took up residence and established a nursery. When the war was commenced, he was impressed into the Army of the Confederate States, and he was not allowed to come home, and death relieved him of his service. But the article continues and says that an Arkansas man, it doesn't mention J.W. Demby at this point, it's an Arkansas man brought his body back and speaks freely of the conditions there. So he tells the old story that there are hundreds of Union men, good unconditional Union men in Arkansas, who are afraid to speak of what they think. Everyone is in arms. but the man who refuses to join a company is regarded with suspicion and is not safe. So there's several articles around this incident, and probably word got back to Arkansas that Demby was saying these things. And some of the next articles are like, it's Demby writing back and saying, I didn't say any of that, they're lying. But based on everything else he'd ever said, he was probably under pressure to disavow those statements. But just a quick timeline of events and how the Dembys fit into the Civil War and spring and summer of 1862. The Confederate Conscription Act was passed in April 1862, which was compelling eligible men in the South to join the Confederate Army. That would impress men like Demby. I don't know if James Demby would have been too old, but certainly Josiah Demby. So a lot of Union men end up flocking to, or Unionist men flocked to General Curtis's army that arrived in Batesville in 1862, including James and Josiah Demby. A lot of the men who ended up in Batesville expected to stay in that area or return to their homes as part of a home guard, but General Curtis headed to Helena to their disappointment, and that's where they formed units down there, but they were not going to be protecting their homes. So the 2nd Arkansas Cavalry was formed in Helena. James W. Demby is an officer, but in his books he complains about General Curtis giving them cold shoulder, and talks about how they lacked food for their horses, how many of them became sick and diseased. It was not a good place to be, and they were not happy being there. Josiah's obituary in 1918 says that he served under his father without pay, and that he'd been rejected from officially serving for physical disqualification, that he had weighed but 90 pounds at that time. So I don't know if he was suffering from some other affliction, or if he became sick in Helena, but he was not officially a member of the 2nd Arkansas Cavalry because he was not fit. Eventually, the men were moved to St. Louis, where they were mustered out, that's where James W. Demby begins writing his Mysteries and Miseries. He writes this book right here that's published in St. Louis in May 1863. And now he figured out that James W. Demby is a bit of a character, so the book is very much comes from his personality. I've already quoted you some about how he defends being a Unionist, but he has a lot of information about General Curtis, a lot of complaints about General Curtis. So he's a really good source on General Curtis and that time period. And then I think for interest, he said that there's mysteries. He's the lead title of the book with mysteries. There's a little section there where he tells a story about people finding a bundle of sticks, and they think that they try to read something into it like it's a mystery. But it's kind of a red herring. There's really no mystery there. But by July 1863, did I go too far? By July 1863, he's in Memphis, and so the Mysteries and Miseries is written by a refugee. So his name is not in the book, but now he's claiming authorship of the book when he's in Memphis in 1863. And he's also saying, I'm writing a new book, so send me all of your Confederate atrocities and I will publish it as a book. That's July 1863. And then in September 1863, as soon as Union troops retake Little Rock, Demby is there, and federal troops seize the Arkansas Gazette. They give the current editor the option to keep publishing, but he says that he would make a better federal prisoner than a federal editor. So they give the press to James W. Demby. But he only publishes either 1 or 2 issues. He's only there for about 2 weeks before he's ousted by federal officials. And the office would have been on the ground. Now it's the grounds of Historic Arkansas Museum, not where they have Woodruff's Press, but on the corner where the Visitor Center is at Scott. So there's the article. It says J.W. Demby is hereby authorized to take possession of the office of the Little Rock Gazette and enter upon duties and proprietor of the same. He's not there very long. But Demby has his account of what happened. So in his third Missouri Cavalry book that he published, written by A.W. Petty. Here's a little footnote to Petty's words. He said, only 2 numbers of this paper appeared before the rebels and their friends through motives of self-preservation influence the federal authorities to suppress it by ordering the editor out of lines within 24 hours. Ordering him out of lines. The paper was stopped in the copperhead sheet entitled The National Democrat, run by General Steele's staff officer by the name of Dr. C.B. Meador. A semi-rebel was established upon its ruins and that of its loyal editor. So that's Dembys. Demby has a Union citizen file that has a different story. So there's proceedings that took place 2 weeks after he takes over paper. Proceedings of the Board of Officers. Inquiry into certain allegations of improper conduct professed against J.W. Demby. These are the words in this inquiry. That he introduced a whore into a house occupied by a citizen and then lived with her in disgrace of the army in which she is associated. That he proposed to make an improper and dishonest disposition of government property. I guess he's like stealing government property and selling it, I guess. That he is a dealer in counterfeit Confederate States money. He's got a printing press and he is, I guess, printing worthless Confederate money. I don't know what worth Confederate money had, but he's printing it. And the Army does not like that. I think later documents in the same files that Dembys says it's a misunderstanding, that he really has he had the opportunity to bring in witnesses to defend him, but doesn't seem to have done that. So I said that there are a few of, I think one issue of his Arkansas Journal that's published in 1865. And well, one thing that's interesting about it is that him and Meador seem to go at it, and we don't have contemporary back and forth of them attacking each other. But in this issue, this must be May 10th, 1865, Meador is apparently going to run for Congress, and Demby editorializes and says that he is such a joke. Meador out for Congress. I'm gonna underline some of the better parts. But he said, well, he basically just makes fun of him. He's not a big fan of him.
Says you were played out.
Yeah.
Wow.
Like, damn.
But this is not a response, but here's Meador talking about Demby. He said the left Bauer Journal editor was in a rage yesterday, snappish as a snapping turtle, frothing like a wild boar, mad because we refused him a place in Memphis, and we were as poor as Job's turkey and had no place. We like to select our own company and would not touch Demby as a bedfellow or office companion with a 40-foot pole. They do not like each other. All right, so switching gears a little bit, talking about the son, Josiah Demby. Now here's his CDV. This is the one at the old State House. There's one at in Butler Center too. That's on, you can find Wikipedia page. But he, Josiah Demby, signed a oath of allegiance on March 2nd, 1864 at the Bluff. His father did the same a day later. And then on March 8th, Josiah Demby enlisted in the 4th Arkansas Cavalry as a first lieutenant at Little Rock. And so that's probably when this picture is made, right there in around March 8th, 1864. Do you agree, Mark? Mark agrees. And then a few details or points about the Dembys in politics in post-war Arkansas. So I think this one's interesting that in November 1865, James W. Demby is the secretary at the Color Convention. And one of the articles says that he was a regular at Freed People's political meetings. So everything I had read about him before, it seems like he's not really interested in African American civil rights. So I don't know if he had a change of mind or he's looking for votes and an audience. But he's a regular. He's frequenting these Freed People's political meetings. It also appeared about this time, at least by 1867, that the Dembys have relocated to Montgomery County, where they established a farm. And so JW is a candidate for the state constitutional convention, doesn't win.
But about the same time period, Josiah Demby is in the Arkansas House, serving from Montgomery County. Militia wars, which I've covered a little bit already, take place. James W. Demby announces himself as a candidate for Pulaski County Sheriff. That's a win. There's another notice later that fall that he is visiting Little Rock from Drew County. I don't know what's going on in Drew County, but he seems to be moving around quite a bit. But Josiah seems to be staying in place. He's still in Montgomery County. He's appointed postmaster there. By 1877, James Demby, his father, is in Hot Springs. And then in 1878, Reconstruction was over by that point, obviously. Josiah Demby surprisingly elected to the House of Representatives again. And the article notes, written by the Democrats, he says, we have elected a Republican by running 4 Democrats. So they split the ticket and Josiah got elected. And then I mentioned before that Josiah in 1882 is appointed to the government bathhouse at Hot Springs, getting that one of those political patronage positions. All right, so I'm kind of coming up on my conclusion. I kind of would conclude by talking about the flag a little bit more. And talking about it as a Reconstruction symbol. We don't have a lot of positive symbols of Reconstruction in Arkansas history, especially. Maybe you think about nationally, you can think of more positive symbols of Reconstruction. But I think this one can be thought of as mostly a positive. It's a little bit contested. It's a positive symbol. Of course, Reconstruction is kind of hard to talk about. It's a complicated and poorly understood time period. It's often demonized, yet it's a really significant period in American history. And it's complicated because you're reconstructing our government. You're trying to usher in former Confederate states back into the Union after armed rebellion. And you have to do that constitutionally. While at the same time, there's a public skepticism about a stronger centralized federal government. There's a lot of resistance to this. But it's a very creative and meaningful policy-making period to build a new order of free and equal citizens on the ruins of an old order. So a lot of important legislation and constitutional amendments come out of Reconstruction. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, which abolished slavery, created birthright citizenship, defined civil rights, and granted universal male suffrage. But also a time in which we freed 4 million African American slaves from bondage, and we established established schools and communities for those African Americans. So we don't have a lot of symbols in Arkansas history, and mostly they're probably negative. So here's a negative one that demonized former Republicans. And so this is something that's at the Yale Library. It's this funeral invitation for Clayton and his gang, Clayton and Company. So the masses of Jefferson County, representing the people of Arkansas who oppose thievery and corruption, and office rings and ballot box manipulators who desire honesty and good government, will celebrate their funeral in effigy. So they will make a procession from the courthouse to the Mary Grove, where the cremation exercises will be had. So they're going to burn probably Clayton and other former Republican officials in effigy. So it's kind of a negative symbol, but we have images like this of U.S. colored troops being mustered out in front of the old State House. It's a Harper's Weekly, 1866. So it's a very positive symbol of freedom fighters who are being mustered out and being men who are literally fighting for their own freedom, who are being reunited with their newly freed families, and they will establish free families, free communities. And it's right there in front of a symbol of government too. So it's a very positive symbol. And this is one that maybe many of you haven't seen before. I think is really interesting. This is a painting by James Henry Smith entitled Election Day, painted around 1872. And that's the Drew County Courthouse in Monticello. It's a painting depicting, so it's a Reconstruction era election day. So you've got the courthouse with the American flag flying on it. You have groups of men down there, both white and black, who are participating in elections and voting.
freely. Does anyone know who James Henry Smith is? So he was a Pennsylvania-born free black man who came to Drew County around, I guess, sometime in the late 1860s or early 1870s. I think he's associated with the American Missionary Association, so he came as a teacher, teaching rural Drew County. But he was also a painter. He was appointed postmaster in Drew County and Monticello, and sometime in the early 1870s. But he's more famous for his time in Little Rock, which he was a dentist. He's also the father of Florence Price Smith. Everyone knows. But so like everyone who writes about Florence Price Smith, they will write about James Henry Smith, but they don't know about his time in Drew. But this painting belongs, as far as I know, it still belongs to the Drew County Historical Museum in Monticello. When I first saw it, it was sitting on the floor in that picture. We've gone to sleep again.
That's right.
Oh, here we go. There's the flag there. There's the men voting. All right, so yeah, I think that's this painting is a little known symbol of Reconstruction, artifact of Reconstruction. I've never seen it published anywhere. I know it was documented in the Arkansas Made project, but I haven't seen anyone really write about it. All right, so back to the flag, and then I'll wrap up. So, what does this flag mean? We'll kind of break it up. It's a federal flag. It has 30 stars and stripes, 13 stripes. Like I told you earlier, I don't know why the 30 stars are there, probably because it's an old flag. But it's also a political flag. It has U.S. Grant's name on there. It also has this motto, strict observance of the law. And it has the battle honors on there also of Center Point, November 12, 1868. But, what does the flag mean? What were these guys thinking when they were under the flag? So I think it's interesting that this is a state militia under a federal flag. So it's, they're not under an Arkansas flag enforcing Arkansas laws. They kind of consider themselves part of this new nation rather than a new state admitted to the Union. So they're an armed state militia carrying a federal flag. So they're kind of, enforcing these federal laws on these unreconstructed people in South Arkansas or the Klan. But also it's partisan, so it was probably not received by the locals very well. It has U.S. Grant's name on there. I think it was probably, a political flag before it was a battle flag. Grant had just been elected, but Grant is also the federal general who won the Civil War. So he was a national symbol in his own right. He's also the president. But I think that this motto that's on there is really interesting. A strict observance of the law. I don't know exactly where that came from. I've tried to find that phrase, word for word in other places. I didn't really find it. But maybe it kind of gives us some insight into how they were thinking. I think that they put the word strict in there. It's like there's no room for disobeying any laws, and we're down here to enforce these new federal laws on this part of the state. So the United States is a nation of laws. Our social and civil society are based on law and order, and we have to enforce that. And we will have no tolerance for rebellion against laws and the rights of all Americans, which now included Black people. And that was a problem for a lot of these group areas, people who were sympathetic to the Klan. So that's maybe some insights into what they were thinking. And that's really my final thing. I did throw a historiography on the end. These are different sources that mention the Dembys. There are others, but these are some of the main ones. And really the only source that really goes any use of Dembys' writings is Ken Barnes. He's the only really historian who's really dove into some of the things that Demby said about General Curtis and stuff and incorporated his writings. Anyway, that's it.
Thank you. Okay, so we have a couple of questions online. Angela Walton Raji is on, and she has spoken to this group, and she's been our genealogy. So we love Angela. She would like to know Are there any documents that reflect proceedings of the colored convention? Also, did this occur in Little Rock?
I think there are documents on the color convention. I know that there's an important website that has tried to gather all those documents. So I think if you Google color conventions, you'll find it's university that's done it. I can't remember the university, but they pulled together a lot of stuff from all over states. But that's the source I would go to. Yeah.
And she'd also like to know, when did James Henry Smith come to Arkansas?
That's a good question. I'd have to look at my notes, but I know I have a newspaper article in which it's mentioned that he is a teacher. I can get back with Angela Tillery, but I have exactly, but I want to say 1868, but I'm not exactly sure.
Any questions here?
Where are the Dembys buried?
Where are they buried?
I don't know where James is buried. I think he died in Eureka Springs. Seems like his will was either in a Missouri courthouse or it was in Carroll County, but he was like in Missouri and in Eureka Springs in his life. So I don't know where he's buried, but Josiah and his family they ended up in Hot Springs. So most of them are buried in Hot Springs. I don't remember the cemetery that's there. No, they're all Hot Springs. Yeah.
An old cemetery in Hot Springs?
So
Is that Friendship?
it's
Hollywood. How did I get Friendship on Hollywood? But yeah, Hollywood. We'll go with former.
I know you can find them on Find a Grave.
Yeah.
Right, I didn't think about all this.
I don't know. I've done a lot of research. I mean, when I was walking over here, I thought I probably need to put this in some sort of short, succinct form. I sort of started writing and it's kind of getting long all over the place. Then it goes to a presentation, but I could probably synthesize it better now.
Do we have an entry on the EOA?
On Dembys now,
That's a good start.
it is a good start.
It's a good starting place. And you could expand on it.
Yes, that's probably what I should do.
Angela has.
Oh, Angela has another question. Are there any Demby descendants still in Arkansas?
I think there are. I have not tried to connect with any of the Demby descendants. But no, obviously the old State House collection comes from Demby descendants, two different descendants. So I know there's a guy in Bella Vista who gave the flag, and his ancestry account had a lot of interesting documents that I couldn't find anywhere else. And the Dembys, stayed in Hot Springs. I'm pretty sure there's still people in Hot Springs too.
Right.
I wouldn't doubt it.
Yeah.
A lot of them.
Yeah.
But they have not contacted me, and I haven't contacted them before.
Put an all call out or something. Well, thank you, Blake.
Welcome.
Thank you for coming and doing this for us. And let me switch places with
Turn to the
you
podium.
and find my notes. So next month, we will have our very own Danielle Asorda to talk about New Deal architecture in Little Rock. That's going to be Wednesday, July 5th at noon, and we will be back here at UA Little Rock downtown, 333 President Clinton Avenue, as well as on Zoom. And I think the Demby folks are a perfect example of saving your stuff and giving it to a museum or an archive, because we wouldn't know about this family if they hadn't done that. And I think that a lot of times I'll get on my soapbox for 5 seconds. A lot of times we think our stuff isn't important enough, and I think this shows that it is important. So thank you, everybody, for being here, and we'll see you next month. Go ahead. I was going to look at something. I think I figured out how